The day started like every other, following the usual routine that felt more like muscle memory than anything else. As a former military officer, the discipline ingrained in you never really leaves, even when you're no longer in uniform. The morning workout, a quick breakfast, and then straight into the day's tasks. It was all so methodical. Yet beneath the surface, there was a persistent feeling, a nagging sense that something was about to shift, although I couldn't quite place what it was. Reflecting back, I now understand that feeling was a warning I should have heeded. For years, I thought I had built a solid foundation, a loving wife, a steady job, and a secure home. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. In hindsight, I should have noticed the cracks before everything crumbled, but there's no changing the past. All you can do is brace yourself when the impact finally arrives. That day, I was blindsided by a betrayal I never anticipated. During my deployment in South Asia as an army officer, I survived 4 ambushes. Each taught me vital survival lessons. First, always remain vigilant and anticipate threats. Unfortunately, I missed the signs with Jenna and David Rogers. Second, immediately seek cover, which I did by retreating to my study. Lastly, develop a plan to extract yourself from danger. I quickly devised a strategy, changing into casual clothes and discreetly placing my Android phone in my jacket pocket to record. I went to my closet, retrieved a hidden key from an old toolbox labeled Captain M.G. Henderson, USAF, and found my military-issued Glock 19, which had saved my life on more than one occasion. I had been married to Jenna for 9 years, and we had 3 wonderful children, Jacob, aged 8, and twin 7-year-old girls, Lily and Mia. My family was everything to me, and I did my best to ensure work never interfered with our time together. We lived in a 5-bedroom home in an idyllic suburb. Our parents lived close by and often visited, as did Jenna's brother, who lived nearby. Life seemed perfect until the kids started school and Jenna returned to work. I should have noticed the changes, but I was too confident in Jenna's loyalty. She began dressing more provocatively, our intimacy dwindled, and she started spending more time at work. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off, saying it was an incredible career opportunity that would benefit us financially. I had met her boss, David Rogers, a few times at company events and holiday parties. He was the managing partner at her firm, arrogant and overbearing. I never trusted him. The few times I visited Jenna at work, he acted possessive and seemed reluctant to let her leave the office. I hadn't been paying attention to the potential relationship between Jenna and her boss. Things unraveled just as the twins finished first grade. The kids were spending the weekend with my parents, and I was looking forward to rekindling our relationship. But when I arrived home that evening, Jenna was already dressed up, looking stunning and clearly ready for a night out. "You look amazing. If I'd known we had a date, I'd have rushed home. Just give me a few minutes to freshen up and I'll be ready." "Where are we going?" I asked with a grin. Jenna gave a smirk that didn't suit her. "We're not going anywhere. I am, but not with you," she said. I was stunned. What are you talking about?" I asked. "I have a date with my boss, David Rogers, and this is just the beginning. From now on, there will be new rules. David's picking me up, and I'll be staying with him in a downtown apartment tonight and tomorrow. I'll be back Monday morning," she said calmly. "What the hell are you talking about?" I shouted. "Calm down. This is how it's going to be. I'm leaving, and I'll be back Monday," she replied coldly. "Nonsense. If you think I'm putting up with this, you're wrong. You're out, and don't come back," I said, my anger rising. "No, Mike. I'm coming home. We're staying married, and I'll still live here. I love you, but I need more. If you make this difficult, you'll be the one leaving. It would be a shame for our kid's father to end up in prison. Let's sit down, and I'll explain the changes before David gets here. He'll be here in an hour. If he has to explain it, you'll like it even less," Jenna said confidently. "If that scumbag shows up, he'll get his butt kicked in 60 minutes, I replied. "You don't want to do that," Jenna warned. "You need to listen to what he can do to you if you don't cooperate. He'll have Mark with him, his driver and bodyguard. Mark is huge, mean, and won't hesitate to put you in the hospital." I felt that old familiar sense of danger, like being back in South Asia, caught in an ambush. On one side was my wife, and on the other, David Rogers. They had the upper hand, and I was cornered. I squeezed past Jenna and headed upstairs. "Where are you going?" she demanded. "I need to clean up. I'll be down in 5 minutes," I said, trying to regain my composure. As a soldier, I learned 3 rules for surviving ambushes: anticipate, take cover, and plan an escape. I missed the first with Jenna and David, but I retreated to my study and devised a plan. I changed into casual clothes, set my phone to record, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. I went to the closet and retrieved the hidden key. Inside an old toolbox marked Captain M.G. Henderson, USAF, I found my military-issued Glock 19, a pistol that had saved my life in combat. As I loaded the weapon, I heard Jenna call from downstairs. "Get down here, Mike, or you'll regret it." "I'll be right down. Get me a beer," I replied, loading the chamber. I tucked the weapon behind my belt and pulled my jacket over it, concealing it. I then activated the phone's recording, placed it back in my pocket, and prepared to confront Jenna. I was determined to let her talk, to get her to reveal her plans and how she viewed the situation, using the interrogation skills I'd learned in the military. When I entered the living room, Jenna was at the dining table with a glass of white wine and a cold beer set out for me. "It's about time," she said. "We need to talk before David arrives." "Sounds like you have a lot to say, Jenna. Tell me about this new reality I have to accept," I replied. She started. "I want you to remember that I love you more than anything. I want to grow old with you, and I don't want to hurt you." I cut her off. "No more sweet talk, Jenna. Just call me Mike and I'll call you Jenna." She seemed offended but continued. "As of tonight, things have changed, and you need to accept that. David and I have been having an affair for almost 8 months. It started with flirting, and now we're very close. I was flattered by his attention, and eventually, it led to more." "Clearly you haven't thought about the consequences," I said. "I'm sorry, Mike, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. You're still the person I want to spend my life with," she replied. "Good luck with that," I muttered. "Why confess now after months of lying?" I asked. "We were tired of hiding it. We want to enjoy our relationship openly, sleeping together, traveling, and spending time together as lovers. The only way to do that was for you to accept it," she explained. "Good luck with that," I repeated. "No, Mike, we're staying married. You just need to accept that I'll be spending time with David, staying overnight, traveling, and attending events. It will be good for us financially. Think of the benefits: vacations, college for the kids, upgrading the house at the lake," she said. "If you think I want anything paid for with that money, you're wrong," I shot back. "I'm not a tramp," Jenna said angrily. "I'm an asset to the company and proud to be David's mistress. This won't last forever, maybe a few years, and then things will go back to normal," she added. "David also wants to be your friend. He believes we can share, as long as everyone gets what they want. He knows I love you, and still want you in my life. He might even become a family friend, maybe an uncle to our kids. He will never be around my kids. Why would he want to get close to my family? Doesn't he have his own? David is married to a younger woman from a prominent family, but she can't have children. Maybe he should adopt and stay out of other people's marriages," I said. "David wants his own kids, an heir for his law practice. He'd prefer a son but would accept a daughter too," Jenna replied. "Then why doesn't he just use a surrogate and have as many kids as he wants?" I asked. "He mentioned it," Jenna replied, "but he feels he'd be a terrible father. He wants any child he has to grow up in a loving family," she added, lowering her head. I felt my anger rising. "So he wants to get you pregnant and have me raise his kid?" "It wouldn't be illegitimate," Jenna insisted. "It would be my child too, and I'd love them just like you would because you love me. The baby would have the last name Rogers, and David would pay us a lot of money to raise them, covering all expenses until they graduate from college." "Are you pregnant yet?" I asked. "No," she answered, "but he wants me to stop taking the pills soon. I told him I wanted you to be okay with this new arrangement first." "This just keeps getting better," I muttered. Jenna got angry. "Stop saying that," she demanded. "I know you're upset now, but we hope you'll come around eventually." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Jenna rushed to open the door, and her boss, David Rogers, entered, wrapping his arm around her and kissing her. "This just keeps getting better," I said again under my breath. "How did he take it?" David asked. "Not well. I think you need to explain the consequences," Jenna replied. David, a tall, slightly overweight man with graying hair, stepped into my personal space, exuding confidence. "Mr. Henderson, we need to talk," he said firmly. "Talk? I should kick your ass," I retorted. "You can try," he smirked. "But my driver will be on you before you know it. You'll be in jail tonight, so why not sit down?" I glanced at the large man outside at the door, sighed, and reluctantly sat down. "Great. Now we can talk like civilized people. Your wife agreed to be my personal assistant, which includes some additional responsibilities. We've enjoyed our relationship for 8 months, but we're tired of hiding. You two will have a new arrangement. I'll handle Jenna's needs most of the time, at the apartment or office, but occasionally at your home when you're not here." "You think I'm going to accept this? I'll divorce her before I put up with this crap," I snapped. David remained calm. "Mr. Henderson, I suggest you rethink that. I'm a powerful attorney with the biggest law firm in the state. If you try to divorce her, I'll make sure you lose everything: your house, your money, and your kids. You'll be paying alimony and child support while she continues to enjoy life with me. You might even end up in jail and lose your job." Your family and friends will turn their backs on you. I sat there stunned, realizing how far Jenna and David were willing to go. David knew I wouldn't act rashly now. He warned me that any attempt to fight back would bring serious consequences, including physical harm. Be a good boy and accept this new arrangement, he concluded. Your wife is a great assistant. I turned to Jenna and asked, Would you really do this to me? She responded, I don't want to, Mike, but I won't have to if you cooperate. Over time, this will feel normal, and you won't even think twice about it. Still in shock, I watched them head toward the door. Just as they were about to leave, I spoke up. Before you go, I have a few things to say. Annoyed, David rolled his eyes. Make it quick, I began. After a couple of drinks to mourn my marriage, I'm calling your wife and telling her everything. Then I'll call Jenna's brother, Ryan, and let him inform your parents. David seemed surprised, as this wasn't the response he expected. What did you say? He asked. Ignoring him, I continued. Tomorrow morning, I'll change all the locks. Afterward, I'm taking Ashley down the street out for dinner and dancing. She's been flirting with me for months, and until now, I wouldn't have considered it. But things have changed. Jenna looked hurt. Mike, you can't do that. I pressed on. When you return Monday, you'll find all of Jenna's belongings in the yard. Pick them up before the sprinklers go off. Monday morning, David turned red with anger, clenching his fists as he realized his threats had no effect. Jenna looked pained. One last thing, I added. Monday, I'll meet with a divorce attorney. I'll file for divorce on grounds of infidelity and name you, David, as a co-defendant. I'll also sue you for alienation of affection and for violating your firm's policies. Even if the lawsuits don't stick, they'll publicly embarrass you and damage your reputation. David exploded in anger, throwing the overnight bag against the wall and stepping into my personal space, jabbing me in the chest. I resisted the urge to retaliate. Listen, Mike, he sneered. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm David Rogers, head of the largest law firm in the state. I could destroy you legally in a day. By the time I reach the apartment, you'll be arrested on false charges. You think you can fight me? You can't. I know the police, the district attorney, the judges. They all owe me favors. If you step out of line, your life will be over. David was on a roll, and I let him continue. If you go out with Ashley tomorrow, the police will stop you, find drugs in your car, and you'll spend years fighting charges. No lawyer will take your case against me, and I'll still be enjoying your wife while you're ruined. Do you understand, Mike? I believe you, I replied sarcastically. David glared at me. Show some respect. Call me Sir or Mr. Rogers. One more insult, and Mark will teach you some manners. He tried to punch me, but I hit him first, shoving him onto the couch. Jenna rushed to his side as he screamed, You'll pay for this! Mark, get in here! The door opened, and Mark, a large, intimidating man, entered the room. Yes, Mr. Rogers? He said. Take care of him, David ordered, and Mark advanced toward me. Jenna tried to protest, but David dismissed her with a wave. I expected trouble when Jenna mentioned David would bring his bodyguard, so I stood my ground. As Mark swung his fist at my head, the pain hit, and I wondered if I'd need a new carpet for the bloodstains. Mark hesitated, unsure whether to keep striking me, and looked to David for guidance. Punch him, Mark, David ordered. Realizing I couldn't take much more, I taunted Mark, saying, You punch like a girl. His pride wounded, Mark prepared for another punch. Before he could react, I managed to defend myself, and the situation took a sudden and shocking turn. Mark looked stunned, realizing he was in a dangerous fight. As he fumbled for his weapon, I warned him to stop, and the tension in the room escalated further. I crawled over, grabbed his weapon, and pocketed it. How much respect do you think I have for you? I asked Mark. He shook his head. Exactly none, I said. No reason not to destroy you, right? Mark groaned in pain. I told him if I didn't get him to a doctor soon, he might not make it. As I focused on Mark, Jenna suddenly shouted a warning, and I turned just in time to see David approaching with a fireplace poker. I instinctively tried to block it with my arm, but the force left me in severe pain. The weapon fell to the floor, and in the tense moment I managed to grab it first, preventing further escalation. Now, where's your phone? I demanded. David hesitated, then pointed to his coat pocket. I pulled out the phone and told him to unlock it. With shaky hands, he did. Now call your wife on FaceTime, I ordered. David's wife answered, confused. David, why are you calling? Who is this? Mrs. Rogers, I said. I'm Mike Henderson. You don't know me, but your husband knows my wife, Jenna. They've been having an affair for months. Her shock was clear as I showed her husband's face on the floor. Oh my God, she screamed. Don't hurt him! Mrs. Rogers, I explained. Your husband and my wife planned a weekend together. When I objected, he had his driver try to take care of me. Unfortunately for Mark, I had to defend myself. David told me he was working in San Diego this weekend. He lied. He's here with Jenna, who was ready to spend the weekend with him. I showed her Jenna. "This is what's really happening, Mrs. Rogers. I'm surprised too. I have to go now. The police will be here soon." "It was nice talking to you," I said, tossing the phone aside. Turning back to David, I added, "Well, now your wife knows about your little side activities. What were you planning if I told her? Send Mark and his friends after me, right?" David didn't respond, too focused on clutching his injured leg as blood seeped through his pants. I noticed a foul smell. "Did you just shit your pants?" I asked, mocking him. Jenna looked horrified as the situation unfolded. "Jenna, bring me my briefcase," I continued. Calmly requested, still holding the weapon on David. Nervously, she retrieved it, and I pulled out my laptop, holding it up. "Is this the computer you were going to load with evidence?" I asked. David said nothing. I turned it over, placed it near his head, and fired 2 bullets into it. The gunshot echoed in the room, filling it with smoke. Leaning in, I whispered in his ear, "Try loading it with anything now, asshole." Satisfied, I stood up and walked into the kitchen. My mind was racing, and my head throbbed with pain. I splashed water on my face, realizing I might have a concussion. When I returned to the living room, everyone was still in place. "Stay put until the police arrive," I said sarcastically before stepping onto the porch. Outside, several neighbors had gathered. One called out, "Mike, were those gunshots?" "Yes. Did anyone call 911? I asked, and a couple of people raised their hands. Colonel Ryan Sage, a retired Army officer and my best friend, was among them. "Are you hurt, Captain?" he asked with concern. "You should see the other guys," I replied with a grim smile. Hearing sirens in the distance, I called out, "Colonel, I need your help." "Of course, Captain," he replied, stepping onto the porch. "Help me unload my weapons and put them on the table. I don't want to be holding one when the police arrive," I said, handing him Mark's weapon. The colonel quickly disarmed the weapons and placed them on the table. Ashley, a neighbor, noticed my injuries and approached to help. Turning to the colonel, I said, "I wish I could explain everything, but there's no time. I had a fight with my wife's boyfriend, a powerful lawyer. He threatened to plant drugs in my car and have me arrested. After this is over, could you hide my car if the garage isn't taped off? The code is my street address." "Will do, Captain," he replied. Ashley added, "Mike, you don't look well." "My head is spinning," I admitted. "Maybe I got hit harder than I thought. Ashley, help me sit down." Just as 2 police cars arrived, sirens blaring, the officers made their way through the crowd, weapons at the ready. The colonel assured them there was no immediate danger and pointed to the unloaded weapons on the table. One officer looked at me and said, "You need medical attention." 2 ambulances arrived, and medics rushed into the house to tend to Mark. Meanwhile, my head was spinning more, and Ashley told me to lie down. A medic examined my face and arm, suspecting it was broken. I lost consciousness, and only vaguely remember Mark being carried out on a stretcher and David limping to the ambulance. A female officer then escorted Jenna outside toward a police car. She stopped when she saw me lying on the porch, tears streaming down her face as she looked at my injured condition. "Mike, I'm so sorry. This isn't what I wanted," Jenna cried. "I never meant for you to get hurt." She tried to reach out to me, but I pushed her away. "Go to hell, Jenna," I said coldly. Her handler quickly escorted her to the police car. I'm not sure if I passed out or if the medic gave me something, but I was out for a few days. When I woke up, my vision was blurry, but I saw a nurse who seemed like an angel in white, though she turned out to be about 60 years old. "Mr. Henderson, can you hear me?" she asked. "I'm so glad you're back with us." "I must be in a hospital," I said weakly. "Yes," she confirmed. "You're at St. Luke's General Hospital. You've been asleep for several days." "Several days?" I exclaimed. "Yes, I'll get the doctor. Just relax. My name is Irene," she said kindly before leaving. Left alone, I assessed my injuries. My right forearm was in a cast, my face was bandaged, and my left eye and nose were painful to the touch. Aside from these injuries, I was hooked up to machines, including a saline drip and a blood pressure cuff. I also had a catheter. Irene returned with the doctor, who introduced himself as Dr. Stevens. He explained that I had a fractured forearm, a broken nose, and a black eye. They had kept me sedated due to a minor concussion. Since it was late, he gave me something to help me sleep until morning. When I woke up again, I found my left wrist handcuffed to the bed rail. "What the hell?" I exclaimed, tugging at the cuff. "Relax, Mr. Henderson," said a voice from across the room. A middle-aged man in a suit introduced himself as Detective Lieutenant Morris. "We were worried you might try to run," he said. "Run? In this condition? Why would I run?" I asked, bewildered. "You're under arrest," Morris replied calmly. "For what?" I asked, shocked. "Assault with intent to commit murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and several other charges, including unlawful discharge of a firearm. These charges were filed by David Rogers on behalf of himself, Mark Angelo, and your wife Jenna, he explained. I should have known, I muttered. The detective then read me my rights and left the room. Irene returned quietly to check my vitals. I asked her if she knew about the handcuffs, and she confirmed she did, apologizing softly. I tried to lighten the mood by joking about taking her to dinner when this was all over. Later, Dr. Stevens reassured me that my injuries would heal and mentioned that I'd be moved to another room with a different doctor. Shortly after, Detective Morris and some orderlies wheeled me up to the 3rd floor, past a police guard. Once in my new room, the handcuffs were removed, and I was reconnected to the machines. Before leaving, Morris informed me that I'd appear in court via video in a few days to enter a plea. He also said he'd arrange for a public defender to meet with me. As I lay in that hospital room, I reflected on how quickly my life had turned upside down. I grieved for my marriage and worried about my children. Where were they? What were they being told? Who was taking care of them? I also wondered about my job, having been absent for several days without notice. The hospital staff couldn't answer my questions. On the 5th day, a young public defender named Alex Garrison visited. He outlined the charges against me, which were the same ones Detective Morris had mentioned. He asked how I planned to plead and suggested I might negotiate with the DA if I admitted to some minor charges. I'm not guilty of any charges, I interrupted. Alex seemed surprised but continued. He informed me that Jenna had been staying with her brother Ryan, and the kids were with them. The children were only told that I'd be away for a long time. When I asked about my job, Alex offered to contact my company and explain the situation. As I reviewed the charges, I noticed one for spousal abuse. Alex explained that David added it after Jenna claimed I had hit her, showing photos of bruises on her face and arm. I didn't do that, I protested, but Alex seemed doubtful. I didn't trust him enough to explain further, fearing David's influence. Alex, you have to plead not guilty for me, I insisted. He reluctantly agreed, but warned that I'd need to post bail due to the shooting charges. He seemed skeptical of my innocence. I didn't mention that I had evidence proving self-defense, as I didn't want that information getting to David or the DA. Instead, I asked Alex to contact my uncle John Parker, a retired Navy attorney, for help. I instructed Alex to keep this confidential and only inform Uncle John of the charges and my plea. Later that night, Alex confirmed that my uncle would arrive soon and advised me to say nothing except not guilty at the trial. The next day, I was arraigned via video from the hospital. I pleaded not guilty to all charges. The prosecutor wanted me held without bail, but the judge allowed me to stay in the hospital for a few more days before being transferred to jail. The day before my transfer, Uncle John arrived. He officially took over my case and got permission to visit me. Seeing him brought me to tears, realizing the weight of my situation. After a brief reunion, Uncle John got down to business. He arranged for privacy to discuss the case and updated me on family matters. He reassured me that the kids were fine and staying with Ryan until the house was cleared by the police. Ryan was confused. Jenna had told him what happened and the charges against me, but Ryan, knowing me for years, found it hard to believe. He was relieved that Uncle John was there to help. Uncle John then asked for my side of the story. In a whispered conversation, I told him everything, including how David Rogers, Mark Angelo, and Jenna had likely concocted a false version of events after my arrest. I also revealed that I had a videotape of the entire incident on my phone, hidden in a kitchen drawer. Uncle John didn't show much emotion but seemed relieved that there was potential evidence. I'll be your guardian angel through this, he assured me. You focus on getting better while I build your defense and look into bail. I also asked him to check on my children, and he promised to coordinate with Ryan. After my discharge from the hospital, I was transferred to county jail. A few days later, I appeared before the judge, where Uncle John managed to get me released on bail, though under house arrest. Uncle John had rented a condo in a gated community where I would stay. He lived there too, and while I couldn't leave the community, at least I was out of jail. Uncle John was busy working on the case, including hiring a private investigator to follow leads. The toughest challenge was retrieving my phone from the house without risking legal trouble. He promised to find a way, but knew it would take time. Meanwhile, Uncle John set up new cell phone accounts for both of us, ensuring we could communicate. I called my neighbor, the Colonel, who mentioned some strange activity at my house. When I told Uncle John, he suggested inviting the Colonel over for beers and steaks. The Colonel shared that about a week after the incident, he saw two men in dark clothing trying to pick the garage door lock. He called 911, grabbed his dog and a bat, and confronted them. Surprised, the intruders backed off but threatened him. The Colonel's dog growled, and he took a batter's stance with the bat, which scared them off. They fled in a black SUV with a smudged license plate. The police arrived, took a report, and left. I recalled David's threat to plant drugs in my car, so I was relieved that the colonel had moved it to a safe place. The colonel had another story. A couple of days after Jenna returned to the house, he saw a black SUV parked in front. Two men were talking to Jenna by the open garage, pointing to the spot where my car usually was. After a brief conversation, they went inside, then left about an hour later. The colonel made sure to note the SUV's license plate number. Uncle John checked the license plate against his sources and found it registered to a company called Red Hawk Investigations, a private investigation firm. The company employed only Oscar Gutierrez and Miguel Serrano, both former police officers with checkered pasts. Oscar had resigned over a theft issue, and Miguel was fired for falsifying records. David Rogers' law firm was one of their clients. Retrieving my phone from the kitchen became urgent. Uncle John decided to call Jenna, suggesting a meeting to discuss resolving the situation and possibly dropping charges. Jenna knew Uncle John from family gatherings but was suspicious. She agreed to meet the next day but insisted that one of her lawyer's assistants be present. Uncle John agreed. At the agreed-upon time, Uncle John arrived at my house. Jenna greeted him warmly, and they exchanged a brief hug. She was dressed modestly in a skirt and blouse, her hair in a ponytail. Inside, a young man named Eric Duncan, an associate from David's law firm, was introduced. They all sat in the living room, and Jenna offered to get coffee. Eric suggested getting straight to business, pulling out a tape recorder. Uncle John did the same, and they both smiled. Uncle John started by expressing regret over the situation, stating he had always admired Jenna and me as a couple. Jenna responded sadly, saying she never intended for things to spiral out of control. Uncle John continued, implying he believed the charges against me. He mentioned that I claimed Jenna and David were having an affair, which pushed me over the edge when I saw David at the house. Eric interjected, stating that the evidence seemed solid against me. Uncle John suggested that perhaps I wasn't in my right mind during the incident due to the belief that David was taking Jenna away. Eric considered it, but said they might only entertain that idea if I pleaded guilty. Uncle John responded by asking if all charges needed to be admitted, or if some could be reduced or dismissed. Eric said he'd need to consult David, who had influence with the DA, and might prefer a quieter resolution to avoid damaging his reputation in business. Before leaving, Uncle John reminded Jenna that I loved and missed the kids. He also warned her that if my story was proven true, she could face charges for perjury and obstruction of justice. He directed a similar warning at Eric, suggesting that if he knowingly supported a false narrative, he could also be prosecuted. With that, Uncle John stood up and asked if he could get some water. Jenna pointed him to the kitchen, unaware that retrieving my hidden phone was the real objective. Uncle John went to the kitchen, making sure he couldn't be seen from the living room. He noisily opened the refrigerator, then quickly searched the drawer by the sink, finding my phone hidden among dish towels. He pocketed it, poured himself some ice water, and returned to the living room a couple of minutes later. "Before I leave, Jenna, is there anything you want to say?" he asked. Jenna looked nervously at Eric Duncan, who replied, "We have nothing more to add now, Mr. Parker. We'll let you know about any changes to the charges, and you'll need to cooperate if you want this case to go away." Uncle John thanked them for the meeting and left. He didn't bring the phone back to the condo, but instead had it analyzed by a firm called Digital Forensics Group, DFG. He explained the importance of the video and audio recordings for my defense, and DFG agreed to handle it carefully. They promised to get back to him in a few days. When Uncle John and I visited DFG, they had transferred all the phone's data to their server. They found the crucial video and made multiple copies, ensuring it couldn't be lost or tampered with. We watched the video, which clearly showed the events, including Mark pointing a weapon at me, despite some blurry sections. DFG also discovered over 100 unopened emails and text messages sent after the incident. Most were from friends and family, but one suspicious message contained 35 photos that would have automatically downloaded to my phone's photo files if opened. It appeared that David had tried to plant evidence after I destroyed my computer. Uncle John thanked DFG and decided to leave the phone with them for safekeeping, taking a few copies of the videos with him. As we reviewed the evidence, Uncle John considered our next steps. He pondered whether to present the evidence to the DA now, which might lead to all charges being dropped and possibly implicate David, Mark, and Jenna. However, if David's influence was as strong as suspected, the DA might make the case disappear quietly. Alternatively, we could wait until the hearing, where the prosecution would present its case, and then reveal our evidence, forcing the DA to prosecute the conspirators for perjury, obstruction of justice, and more. That would mean significant jail time and a better chance of getting custody of my kids. When Uncle John asked how I wanted to proceed, I replied, "Let's burn them all." He was pleased. "I was hoping you'd say that, Mike. I want to expose them publicly and have my Perry Mason moment in court." With several weeks until the hearing, Uncle John focused on preparing our case. He noted that revealing the video too early might lead to it being suppressed, so he decided to keep it secret until the right moment. A week before the hearing, Uncle John took a brief leave to return to Los Angeles for his court obligations and family time. During that time, I received a call from the gate guard informing me that Jenna was at the gate asking to see me. I immediately called Uncle John, who advised, "If she wants to talk, hear her out. But be polite and don't touch her. Remember, she's dangerous." "Don't worry, Uncle John. She's poison to me now," I replied. "You know what you have to do?" Uncle John asked. "I do," I confirmed. After finishing my call with Uncle John, I contacted security and asked them to let Jenna through. With a few minutes before she arrived, I quickly tidied up the condo. I cleared the legal papers from the dining table and tossed them on the bed, gathered up the beer cans, cleaned the kitchen, and loaded the dishwasher. I changed into khakis and a polo shirt, combed my hair, and left my 5-day stubble, which gave me a more serious look. When Jenna knocked, I opened the door. She looked great, clearly putting effort into her appearance, with a red pleated skirt and a pink cashmere sweater. Her hair was styled in a loose updo, and her makeup was subtle. "Come in, Jenna," I said. "You look great." "Thank you, Mike. You look good too," she replied, complimenting my slim figure. "I've had time to work out and eat healthier," I said, inviting her to sit on the couch. I brought her a glass of white wine and sat with a glass of red. After a few sips, I asked why she wanted to see me. "Mike, despite everything, I still love you. I never imagined things would go this far. I thought you would accept my relationship with David, and we could have had a lot of money and a good life. In time, things would have returned to normal." "I'm sorry I ruined your plans," I replied sarcastically. "It wasn't my plan. It was David's. He thought he could intimidate you like he does with others. Neither of us expected you to fight back." "Guess he underestimated me," I said. Out of nowhere, Jenna asked, "Where's your car?" I smiled slightly. "I moved it when David threatened to plant drugs in it. By the way, what were those men doing at the house after you returned? They seemed interested in the garage and my missing car." Jenna hesitated before admitting, "They wanted to plant evidence. I didn't want it, but David insisted. You don't seem to mind stacking evidence against me. If you really love me, just tell the truth, and the charges will be dropped." "I can't, Mike. I'm in too deep. David controls everything." "Guess I'm out of luck," I commented. Then I asked, "What about the accusation of abuse? I saw pictures of your injuries, but I never touched you." Jenna explained, "It was David's idea. He came up with a story that you went crazy, accused us of having an affair, and attacked me. Mark tried to help, but you shot him. To make it believable, David punched me to create the injuries. We've been rehearsing the story ever since. I'm sorry, Mike," she added. "I didn't want this to happen. I want things to go back to how they were." "That's not going to happen," I said. Jenna then offered a way out. "David knows about your PTSD. He wants you to plead guilty based on that. He'll use his influence to get you into a veterans hospital for treatment. In a year or less, you could be released, and we could start over with the kids." So that was the real reason she came to talk to me. She wanted me to voluntarily admit guilt, promising that David would help me get a minimal sentence in a veterans mental institution. I didn't believe any of it, but I didn't let Jenna know. Instead, I went along with her. "That sounds good to me, Jenna, but I need time to think about it. Plus, I need to talk to Uncle John. I think he might agree. He doesn't have much evidence to help me compared to the testimony of you, David, and Mark." "Please do this for yourself, Mike," Jenna added. "Do it for me and the kids. In a few years, it will seem like it never happened. It'll just be a bump in the road." "I doubt that," I said. "You've been with another man for months, wanted me to be a cuckold for your boss, threatened to take my kids away if I didn't play along, and made false accusations that will put me in jail for years. That's a big bump in the road. That's why I want you to accept David's offer. It's the easiest way out for all of us," Jenna said with tears in her eyes. "Like I said, I'll think about it," I replied. Once we were done, I assumed it was time for her to leave, but Jenna put her hand on mine and said, "Maybe we could lie down together for a few minutes. I've missed you in my bed. Is there any chance we can sleep together tonight and forget about everything for a few hours?" "That's not going to happen, Jenna," I replied firmly. She got the message. "Please accept David's offer," she said as I walked her to the door. Before leaving, she gave me a hug. It felt sincere, but I didn't return it. The hearing's purpose was to determine whether I would be held for trial. The prosecution was confident, predictably. They put David, Mark, and Jenna on the stand, where they shared their well-rehearsed stories. Uncle John asked each witness just one question. "Do you swear your testimony is truthful?" All three answered affirmatively. Uncle John wanted to go after Oscar, Miguel, and the main witnesses, but proving their attempt to frame me wasn't relevant to the charges against me, especially since their efforts had failed. When the prosecution settled down, it was Uncle John's turn. "With the court's permission," he began, "the defense would like to introduce a videotape of the events as evidence. This tape is exculpatory, Your Honor." Just then, the assistant prosecutor objected, stating this was new evidence that hadn't been presented for review. "There's a reason for that," Uncle John explained. "The defense fears bias from the district attorney and the court, and that our evidence will be unfairly blocked." "Do you have proof that the district attorney is compromised, Mr. Parker?" the judge asked. "The proof is on the video, Your Honor," Uncle John replied. The judge, starting to rise, said, "Then you and the prosecution will come to my chambers, where I will review the tape and decide on its admissibility." Uncle John interrupted, "No, Your Honor, we won't do that." "Why not?" the judge demanded, his anger rising at the defiance. "Because, Your Honor," Uncle John explained, "the defense doesn't trust the court to be impartial, and we won't risk you suppressing our evidence." The judge, visibly perturbed, asked, "Are you accusing the court of corruption, Mr. Parker?" "Possibly, Your Honor," Uncle John responded. "Can you prove your accusation, Mr. Parker? Or is that proof also on the tape?" the judge pressed. "It is on the tape, Your Honor," Uncle John confirmed. "However, I can demonstrate my point if you answer a few questions." The judge, skeptical, clarified, "Let me get this straight, Mr. Parker. You believe you can prove the court's bias against your client by asking me a few questions. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Uncle John affirmed. The judge, now curious, said, "Very well, Mr. Parker. Ask your questions. But if you fail, we'll review the tape in chambers, and I'll rule on its admissibility." "I accept, Your Honor," Uncle John agreed. "But know that if this videotape is deemed inadmissible, and my client is convicted based on the testimony of the 3 prosecution witnesses, I will release the tape to the media and online, regardless of the court's ruling. Furthermore, the tape contains evidence that will call your integrity into question if you don't release it." The judge, feeling threatened, remarked, "I feel like I'm being threatened, Mr. Parker." Before the judge's anger could escalate further, Uncle John quickly asked, "Your oldest son is in college, isn't he, Your Honor? He's attending the Naval Academy, correct?" "Yes," the judge replied. "He's a freshman." "Getting into the Naval Academy is very competitive, isn't it?" Uncle John continued. The judge nodded. "It is." Uncle John elaborated, "First, your son had to apply through your district's congressman or senator. Afterward, he was scheduled for a civil service exam. Based on the results, he was selected along with 9 others. He was sent to a nearby naval base for a medical exam, physical fitness test, and aptitude tests as a pilot and navigator. Additionally, he had to take college entrance exams. Is that all correct, Your Honor?" "Yes," the judge replied, pride evident in his voice. "He got straight A's in high school and was on the swim team every year." "You're understandably very proud of him, Your Honor," Uncle John said, growing impatient. "Now state your point, Mr. Parker." Uncle John pressed on. "Your son's application packet also included 3 letters of recommendation, correct?" "Quite correct, Mr. Parker," the judge confirmed. "Who wrote those letters, Your Honor?" "Let's see. One was from his swim coach, another from his math teacher. Who wrote the 3rd letter, Your Honor?" Uncle John asked pointedly. The judge hesitated before finally admitting, "Mr. David Rogers wrote my son a recommendation for admission to the Naval Academy." Uncle John seized the moment, stating, "Mr. Rogers must have known your son very well unless he fabricated a letter full of falsehoods." The judge clarified, "My son worked in Mr. Rogers' office during his sophomore and junior years of high school. He wants to be a lawyer someday." "So Mr. Rogers is a family friend?" Uncle John inquired further. "He's more of an acquaintance than a family friend and a professional associate in some legal organizations I belong to," the judge replied. "So now, Your Honor, you can understand the defense's concerns about your impartiality in this case." Uncle John concluded his questioning. The judge responded, "You've put me in a position that questions my integrity, counselor. Let me assure you that any association with Mr. Rogers will not influence my decisions, but you've raised a matter of perception." The judge paused for a moment, then looked up and said, "Turn on the video, counselor." Uncle John instructed the bailiff to dim the lights and lower the projection screens on either side of the judge's bench. He turned to me and said, "Showtime, Mike." Then, he pressed the enter key, and the video began to play. The entire scene unfolded before the judge, the prosecution, and the courtroom audience as David threatened me, saying, "I personally know most of the top police officials. I'm friends with many of the attorneys in the DA's office. I've even had drinks with some of them." There was an audible gasp from the prosecution bench. The assistant DA put her head down on the table and began to sob. We all stared at her for a moment before she gathered her things and quickly left the courtroom, still crying. Uncle John continued watching the video. David, Mark, and Jenna tried to quietly leave the courtroom together, but they were easily noticed. The judge explicitly ordered them to remain seated. The remaining ADAs watched the video to the end. The lead prosecutor stood up quickly, clearly wanting a break. But before he could ask, Uncle John said, "I have another video." Without waiting for permission, Uncle John queued up the second video and explained that it had been recorded 2 weeks earlier when my wife visited me at my condo. He then pressed enter, and the video began. Jenna realized the full impact of the video. It showed her confessing everything David had tried to do. "To me," she screamed, "Mike, how could you do this to me?" After a few minutes, David also grasped the gravity of the situation. "You stupid fool. You stupid, stupid fool. You let him record you? What were you thinking?" he exclaimed. Jenna had no idea that when she visited me, I had set my phone to record everything she said. The phone was on the coffee table in front of her, hidden by books and papers. I turned it on just before opening the door to let her in. The ADA requested a recess to review the new evidence. Uncle John handed the ADA copies of the videotapes on DVDs, and the trial was adjourned until the next morning. The next morning, the 3 prosecution witnesses were conspicuously absent. Instead of the acting district attorney, the state's actual district attorney sat at the prosecution table. The judge allowed him to speak first. "I'll be brief, Your Honor," he began. "First, all charges against Mr. Henderson are dismissed. We believe he acted in self-defense when he defended himself against Mr. Rogers and Mr. Angelo. It was a rather violent self-defense, but it was self-defense. Second, my office has issued arrest warrants for Mr. David Rogers, Mr. Mark Angelo, and Mrs. Jenna Henderson for conspiracy to commit perjury, bribery, perjury, assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, making false statements to police, filing false complaints, and obstruction of justice. Additionally, my office was informed that Mr. Rogers attempted to plant false evidence against Mr. Henderson. Mr. Angelo and Mrs. Henderson were aware of this. We have also identified 2 suspects working for Mr. Rogers who attempted to plant false evidence, and we are in the process of arresting them. David Rogers, Mark Angelo, and my wife were arrested but later released on bail. The district attorney was furious to discover that his office had been compromised by David Rogers over the years, and he began rooting out all his colleagues involved with Rogers. Eventually, all the defendants were convicted. David Rogers was the only one who pled not guilty, which proved to be a mistake, as both Mark and Jenna pled guilty and testified against him. David was sentenced to 14 years in prison, Mark received a 9-year sentence, and Jenna was sentenced to 7 years. Oscar and Miguel were arrested for attempting to obstruct justice and tamper with evidence. The district attorney played them against each other until Miguel broke down and confessed, hoping for a lighter sentence. Both ended up serving long prison terms. David Rogers was held in county jail until he was transferred to state prison. Mark and Jenna, however, were given 3 weeks to get their affairs in order before surrendering to the sheriff. Mark spent that time preparing his family for his 9-year absence, hoping to be paroled in 5 years with good behavior, as his lawyer had advised.